Hello and welcome once again to White Lotus of Light educational series. I am embarking on a new overarching series that I'm calling Shadow Wars, the Luciferians versus the Molochians, wherein I talk about some examples of what appears to my eye and is based on reasoned speculation, whether it's extreme speculation or more heavily influenced by verifiable fact, kind of depends on the situation. And it's going to be a little bit different than previous work I've done on this, where I have relied more heavily on historical sources to sort of show this conflict going on through the ages. Since I'll be discussing current relevant modern events, it is by necessity speculative because these groups do not publicly proclaim themselves, although that is starting to change. So in this mini episode, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Luciferian and Molochian factions. And then in subsequent videos in the series, I'm going to be talking about how that conflict plays out in our society and give some concrete examples of that. And so I often talk about on this channel the Venetian black nobility, and just this idea that European blue bloods actually still, or royalty nobility, still have almost unfathomable levels of wealth and also power that is not commonly known. And so if you want to know more about that, then check out my Venetian black nobility series. That's probably a good precursor to this series, but it's not required. So in order to understand the Luciferian and Molochian factions, one of the things you need to understand is this Hindu concept of the Yugas. Yugas are about 2,700 year periods with a 300-year crossover, so 300 years or 3,000 years in total for each Yuga. There is starting at the lowest level of consciousness and working our way up. There's the descending Kali Yuga or Iron Age. And then an ascending Kali Yuga or Iron Age, and that's what we're in currently, and that is ruled by the deity known in the Bible as Moloch, also sometimes described as the lower aspect of the planetary god Saturn. So it is an impulse and an energy that's very, very dense, very heavy, very dualistic, so black and white thinking with no nuance. It's very much about slavery. It's very much about control, top-down control, and control is the most important thing. It's more important than any change or progress, which can actually be seen as a threat to control. This impulse does like, and deity does like technology if it can be used to assert greater control. It's also sort of its calling card is the Epstein-style harm of children, and the historical Moloch or Haman Baal or Baal Haman or Ammon, which was worshipped in Tyre, which is a Canaanite city in modern day Lebanon. The worship of Moloch begins historically only around 3,500, 4,000 years ago, maybe 5,000, pushing it. However, I believe that the worship of this deity began much earlier, perhaps under other names, and didn't really come more to the fore until not terribly long before the time of Solomon the king. And Solomon is, interestingly enough, at this nadir, this lowest point of consciousness, at the absolute descent of Kali Yuga before the ascending Kali Yuga starts moving back upwards. So this impulse is very much about slavery. It's very much about top-down control. It actually kind of enjoys keeping people in miserable, weak conditions, keeping people sick, keeping people uneducated and ignorant. They're easier to control because control is the ultimate goal of Moloch. In fact, Moloch offers two choices: total submission or total annihilation, right? And Moloch is sometimes described as Yeshua or Jesus talked about the peace that passes understanding, which is that most high impulse, this Golden Age impulse, opposite of what we're talking about here. But Moloch is the fear that passes understanding. It's a fear so strong that parents would willingly give up their own children to be sacrificed to that deity, which is exactly what happened in Tyre and later in Carthage, a colony in North Africa and modern-day Libya, most famous probably for Hannibal and the Punic Wars with the Romans much later. Moloch was, or Haman Baal was worshipped openly. Moloch is also known as Kronos to the Greeks, or the lower aspect of the planetary god Saturn. So domination, control, severity, right? So then you move out of these Iron Ages into a Dwapara Yuga, Bronze Age, and then a Treta Yuga, Silver Age, and I'll get back to the ruler of that. But I first want to talk about the Sat Yuga, the Golden Age. So the last time we had a Sat Yuga was during the Age of Atlantis, the mythical Golden Age, which is talked about worldwide among a great many myths and cultures. And so the Golden Age is very much marked by this idea that Yeshua, or Jesus, says in the Bible to love thy neighbor as thyself. So that's sometimes misunderstood as love thy neighbor, like, hey, love your neighbor, be friendly to your neighbor. No. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Understand that your neighbor is thyself, and that your neighbor is godly and is God, is an emanation or an aspect of God, just as you are an emanation aspect of God, and all of this is. And when you have that understanding, you're going to automatically be compassionate and harmonious and work together, and there won't be concern about property rights. Everyone knows everything. I'm not talking about communism here. I want to be crystal clear on that. But in enlightened, where actually people freely give without any need for anything, because they know that everyone's going to take care of their needs, and they'll take care of everyone else's needs, and they'll take care of the planet and all of creation, tend the garden, right? And it's marked by a time of very high consciousness and very high compassion and beauty and creativity, and it's the Golden Age. And that era is ruled by the deity known as the Most High, and that deity's name has been lost. This is the missing name of God that the Jews are looking for, or the Master Mason's word and Masonic lore, and there's other traditions that talk about a lost name for this ultra-benevolent God of the Golden Age. Now, mind you, there are other gods beyond the scope of the big three influences I'm talking about here that very much exist, that very much have power, that very much influence matters on Earth, but they aren't the dominant forces of these eras. They work and operate within the context of, like right now, we all operate within the context of a Molochian civilization. Right? We ourselves, such as myself, I'm aligned with that Most High, that angelic celestial current, the God of the angels. By the way, I want to real quick say, not Jehovah, not Yahweh. That's a usurper God that came along and grabbed that portfolio of the angels, but it's actually not the same. It just sort of took that stuff into itself, and it was able to do so because during the Kali Yuga, the vibration of the Most High is just simply too high kind of to exist here, meaning that we can't even know the name. It's too powerful. We've had emissaries, we've had enlightened beings that have come to teach us, the most prominent of which is Jesus or Yeshua. In the West, that would be the most prominent. Perhaps Kuan Yin in the East would be more prominent, although Buddhist, that's non-dual, but I'm not going to make that distinction right now. So Jesus came to us and spoke of, to love thy neighbor as thyself, be compassionate, turn the other cheek, help people out. But the Council of Nicaea and other councils took many of the teachings of Jesus and threw them out because they weren't useful. And the Molochians were trying to take over and create a control structure by hijacking this pure doctrine that was given to us by Jesus of that Most High. And so that's the Most High impulse of the Golden Age. So this next part is going to be confusing to people, or shocking perhaps to some people who are not very learned in esoteric realms. Now, mind you, in the Bible, other gods are acknowledged. Like it straight up says, let there be no God before me, right? Yahweh or Jehovah is saying that, interestingly enough, all right? The jealous God. That's how you can know it's not the Most High, because the Most High is not jealous, right? The Most High doesn't need or want that. The Most High recognizes all. So, but the Bible acknowledges that there's multiple gods. And indeed, there's tons of multiple gods. And what happened is is that when the Vatican, very much a Molochian structure, took over Christianity after the Council of Nicaea and then eventually fall of Constantinople, and then the Vatican was created in Rome, right? When that came along, they very much went out of their way to demonize and say no other competitors, right? Which is actually very Molochian in nature. And so all kinds of pagan gods, all kinds of other gods got thrown into, that's evil, that's Satan. And a quick note about Satan. I believe Satan refers to Moloch. Satan in ancient Greek simply means the adversary or the opponent or the enemy. That enemy is named in the Bible as Moloch, right? This god that the Canaanites were worshiping that had the Epstein-style harm of children and child sacrifice and all that stuff. And indeed, when Solomon married a wife from Tyre in Lebanon, she set up a temple on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and they started doing all the Moloch worship, harm of children, etc. And that led to the fall from grace of Solomon. And so that god comes up and again as the enemy of the Jewish people in that period of time. And that deity is a deity that it has other names elsewhere in the world, but it's this lower aspect of Saturn. Right? It's just the domination, all the stuff I said earlier. So as part of this process where the Vatican demonized anything other than their book, right? That demonized anything outside of that was literally, not figuratively, literally demonized. Literally pagan gods were called demons, right? But if you think about it, like, there's a great deal of personality difference between the gods that we're aware of in other religious systems, right? So look at just Marvel, right? You have Thor and you have Loki. Very, very different. You would never really confuse those two. One's a trickster, very intelligent, very much around guile and so forth. Kind of Luciferian, interestingly enough. And then there's Thor, very much about kicking ass. Maybe not the brightest, but really kicks ass and hammers others, right? Not similar at all. No subtlety here, nothing but subtlety there, right? Nothing but trickery here, nothing but just open, honest in your face. And it's like that, you know, Zeus is not the same as Hera. Mars in the Roman pantheon is not the same as Mercury. Thoth is not the same as Set in the Egyptian pantheon. Krishna is not the same as Shiva, is not the same as Ganesha, is not the same as Lakshmi, right? All these gods are very distinct and different, and they all exist. They all exist independently of their worshipers. The degree of worship they have determines how much influence they have in the world and how much power they have and so forth, but they're all very distinct. And the reason I bring that up is because as the Vatican demonized all these, especially Celtic pagan religions, because they didn't want any competition, they demonized all kinds of different things. And among them is there's a conflation incorrectly among many, many people who are kind of have, once they discovered what I have, that black magicians will rule the world, they had a knee-jerk reaction to go back into the Abrahamic faiths and that they were going to smite the evil. And right, and who doesn't want to get rid of this Molochian scumbags, right? The problem is when you get into that dualistic thinking of pure evil, pure good, then next thing you know, you're doing the Crusades and you're killing a bunch of innocent people. You're burning down Muslim cities, or you're Muslim and everyone else is evil, and I'm going to go convert the pagans by the sword, and I'm going to rampage all the way into India, or I'm going to the Barbary pirates and grab white people and take them back to the Ottoman Turks for slavery because, hey, they're not Muslim, so they're not really human. Or, hey, I'm Jewish and it's in the Bible, and I'm going to throw babies from the walls of Jericho or wherever it was because it's the evilest enemy. If you're not careful, that Molochian impulse of evil and destruction comes in through the back door from this dualistic binary thinking, the lack of subtlety. So note that. That's important. So this Luciferian impulse, which is the third impulse, because Lucifer rules the Bronze and Silver Ages, this Luciferian impulse is best seen in Renaissance Florence. Think about that explosion of creativity, intelligence, right? Knowledge, wisdom, maybe not wisdom, but knowledge, scientific advancement, artistic advancement, right? The ideas of liberty and freedom and so forth that exploded out of Renaissance Florence. You'd seen it a bit in Templarism before that, but it really came through, especially in the figure of Cosimo Medici in the printing of the Hermetica, which I talk about more in my Venetian Black Nobility series, specifically episode 2, where I talk about that period around the Fourth Crusade up to Cosimo Medici and the printing of the Hermetica and what a critical turning point that is in history. So this Luciferian impulse really wants at its essence to perfect humanity and to have like really high achievements of humanity. So there's meritocracy. There is that same hierarchy that you find with the Molochians, but it's a meritocratic hierarchy rather than a nepotism hierarchy, and one of domination and control and like a figurehead at the top that's a cruel despot or a cruel king. The Luciferian system believes in merit, and so it has like the idea of the republic and laws that are above men, so that way you don't get this like kind of same pyramid of power structure based on just who is following along with the Molochian agenda or not. You have a much more open system to where it's meritocratic, where the best rise to the top, because the point is to advance humanity, to advance the material condition of humanity, to advance science and art. And just think about Renaissance Florence. You can also see it in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the United States, especially the Bill of Rights, where you see things like freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom to worship as you wish, the free trade, and movement among the classes based on merit, right? Based on excellence. And so the goal there is to put humans at the center. So it's the humanism. It's the humanist movement, right? It's very Luciferian. It puts humans and the human's material condition, but there is also a spiritualizing factor with the Luciferians that doesn't exist with the Molochians. The Luciferians kind of let you in on this thing where the higher dimensions, of like the realm of archetypes and the gods and the dream world and the astral realm is actually where the real causative realm, and then down here we have the effect realm in the material world. So that kind of thinking about the more subtle things and invisible energies and visible forces, that's much more in the Luciferian camp, whereas the Molochians just want to keep you ignorant and under control. So this Luciferian impulse puts humans at the center, which puts the human ego at the center, and which also will have Lucifer will say, well, aren't I wonderful that I freed you from this Molochian impulse, and I also gave you all these tools so you could fully express yourself and you can become like God, right? So that's a false light that's leading you not to God, it's leading you to worshiping kind of the self, right? So it's got a bit of a narcissistic quality, but at the center is really the worshiping the humanity as the highest thing, and Lucifer also like kind of in tandem. So I personally align with the Most High and the angelic realms, and I'll never worship Lucifer, and certainly not Moloch, but I would much rather personally exist within a structure controlled by these people who allow freedom of association, free speech, liberty, the advancement of the human condition, and some mobility. And they also the Luciferians believe in contracts. Molochians believe in might makes right. They don't care about laws, really. They do have laws in there mostly to punish other people, but they kind of got duped into that because the Molochians are dumb and they get tricked by the Luciferians all the time, and I'll go into that more later. This is actually my second attempt at this video. The other one didn't record, so some of this is rehashing for me right now, and I'm going to expand on that in later videos. But the Molochians believe in might makes right. Luciferians are more contract-oriented, and the Most High is the contracts aren't required because we all trust and love one another. So this Luciferian impulse is coming more and more to the fore because we're moving out of the Kali Yugas, and in fact, the ascending Kali Yuga ends in the year 2025. And when that ends, it'll have a 300-year crossover period. But very quickly, the Molochians are going to cast aside the Molochian structure. The Luciferians are going to cast aside the Molochian structure and have new structures in its place. And in fact, if you look right now, all the Molochian power structures are like starting to shake and fall apart. And the Molochians are trying to retrench with the Great Reset. And the Luciferians want to offer a different model that has some of the elements of the Great Reset, such as surveillance and maybe digital IDs. And instead of a central bank digital currency, which is very Molochian, some kind of like gold or silverback crypto, something like that. I'll get into that more later. But the Molochian system that's been running for 6,000 years and was really perfected in Babylon, and then perfected perhaps more so in Venice, in Italy, but that system of control via the Babylonian money magic and the talisman of some reserve currency of some kind, and that mind control program that comes from that is very much this Molochian system that's come forward to us now. And there are times in history where this Luciferian impulse, because it's wanting to burst up, because that's what's coming next, you see things like Renaissance Florence. You see things like the Enlightenment in Europe, or the Scottish Enlightenment that led to the founding fathers, that led to the founding of the United States of America. Very Luciferian event, which gave people the idea of liberty, and that's a natural right that we all have. Stuff that really was, other than among the Templar, interestingly enough, was very little discussed anywhere else in the world. There were certain cultures, the Iroquois perhaps, and others who kind of had that idea in place, but it was quite rare. It was quite rare. And the founding United States really marks a new opening. And if you look in each of these instances, the Molochian force hammers it down in every instance, and then tries to co-opt any tools that the Luciferians created to create more control systems that are very rigid. So this Luciferian impulse is coming more and more to the fore. And so I say that the Luciferians are going to defeat the Molochians. And so I'm just going to give a thumbnail sketch, and I'm going to get into one of these now, and we'll get into more of them in future videos. But one of the things I want to make clear real quick is that when I just say Luciferians and Molochians, or someone who's aligned with the Most High, such as myself, I don't mean, in my case, I do worship the Most High, right? But not everyone who follows those currents, or is at that vibrational level, or maybe in a given moment, is acting as a conduit for that energy, right? Because like at different points in our lives, almost all of us have been influenced by all three of those energies. The Molochian energy, when we're like, wow, I was really unnecessarily cruel and mean and really broke that person's spirit. Like, wow, that wasn't like me. That was bad. That Molochian impulse came through you. Or you're educating a bunch of people and you're really excited and creative, and you're sharing stuff, and you're like, wow, I'm really going to get ahead because of these great ideas. I'm really on fire, right? Kind of a sense of like selfish creativity. It's, self-interested creativity, perhaps. That's that Luciferian impulse, that knowledge impulse. And then like if you're being really compassionate and you're giving to charity and you help out some homeless person, not to take a selfie, but to just help that homeless person, that's that Most High impulse. So we all have these impulses kind of move through us at different times. So when I say that someone's a Luciferian or Molochian, I just mean that, especially when I'm talking about public figures, that they're in alignment with that current, whether they're aware of it or not. Now, I believe that at the tops of the power pyramids for the Luciferians and the Molochians, those people are certainly active worshipers and actively interact with that deity, actively do like magic with that deity, and so forth and so on. However, the vast majority of people that are in that power structure probably aren't directly aware of that, even if they're very much aligned with that impulse. In fact, there's a lot of people who are Christian that might be shocked to find out that their general day-to-day behavior and their general sort of like resting energetic imprint is much more Luciferian, right? They're libertarian. They believe in liberty and freedom of speech and hard work and meritocracy. And sure, they can sometimes do acts of charity, but they're in no way ready to have a society that would be a golden age society. They're actually just interested in seeing a much more merit-based, rational, reason-based, contract-based version of reality, which is very much Luciferian in nature. And so when I say people are Molochian or Luciferian, they may directly worship those deities, they may not, and they may not be aware. It's more talking about a level of consciousness in a way, or a frequency of consciousness. So who are some Molochians, for example? So some Molochians, for example, would be like some really obvious ones, Klaus Schwab. I mean, just listen to the guy. Ugh, his energy is just so dark and repressive, right? Baal, or Bill Gates, right? Sometimes called Baal Gates, right? Depop, right? Just wanting to destroy the weak, right? No, not any kind of like enlightened eugenics of wanting the best people to breed and have children, but outright trying to wipe out people that are lesser in his opinion. Very much the central banks, the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, not all of them. Some of them might represent different things, but generally speaking, the Rockefellers and Rothschilds are in that Molochian camp. The central banks are very much in that Molochian camp, slavery and control. right? And so that, and not everybody who's involved in these things is. And in fact, there are a lot of Luciferians in Molochian power structures. Indeed, we all live in a Molochian civilization, so we're all within a Molochian power structure. And Luciferians, because they tend to be very talented, very intelligent, very hardworking, they tend to rise to the top in a lot of different things, but then they reach a level to where the layer above them is just dominated by the Molochians, and maybe some of them get in there because they're willing to do ruthless things to pursue that agenda. And there's a lot of crossover between those two. And indeed, the Luciferians have acted as sort of the consigliere or CEO, or actually better put, presidential level of a corporate structure, to where they execute the plans that the CEO says, or, the consigliere executes the plans that the mafia don says. They've done that and been in that capacity, the advisor and so forth, because they had no choice but to work under and within those structures. Even like those of us in the Most High, we don't like it. We don't like paying taxes that might go to something we disagree with and is repressive and evil, but we just kind of have to, right? And so likewise, those people who are more Luciferian aligned have risen to a high level and work hand in hand with those Molochian structures, even if they have a very intense desire, which they do, to reform it and change it, right? So those are kind of like some Molochian figures, Bill Gates, right? Like Klaus Schwab. And so I'm going to talk about some figures that have been really kind of carrying that Luciferian impulse of freedom of association, free speech, liberty. So like there's that YouTube guy, or Facebook guy that's quite popular named Zuby. He's very much about free association, liberty, and he's like questioning the big C medical thing that's going on, right? Probably the most famous person that I have pegged as a Luciferian, or two, the most famous, are Elon Musk. I mean, he wants to go to space. He wants to colonize Mars. By the way, space travel and getting humans off the Earth is very much like one of the big drivers for the Luciferian faction. Lucifer really wants humans to go colonize other star systems, get involved in exopolitics in a big way. Lucifer is very political. And so Elon Musk, very, very, very much a Luciferian, whether he knows it or not. And I think he might. He's among the people that I think might actively worship the deity, might actively interact with it. He certainly has been sort of put forward as the point person for the Luciferian faction, it seems. I mean, look what he did at Twitter, right? More on that later. Trump, right? The trickster, right? Manipulator, like playing all sorts of sides against each other, and just operator extraordinaire. One of the things about Luciferians, they're not afraid to be dishonest. They don't care, right? They would easily be dishonest or trick you, because they're like, well, if you can't see through the trick, that's on you. And those of us who can, like, we're going to rise to the top. And so that's an example of why there can be deceit and so forth in the Luciferian faction, but maybe not the like really trash lies of the Molochian faction that are just so obvious to where it's like, man, do you even understand how to lie? Right? And you see that a lot with some of the narratives that are unraveling right now. It's just like they keep trotting out the same thing over and over again. That's that dull aspect of the Molochians. They're very powerful as long as they're in power. They're all powerful, but as soon as they're not, they're going to fall rapidly because of that dullness. To them, everything looks like a nail because they're just a giant hammer. They don't have any subtlety or ability to think in nuance, which the Luciferians very much so do. So Candace Owens, another example of that Luciferian impulse. Edward Dowd, the former BlackRock guy, is speaking out against the you-know-what, very very intelligent, very much about data and sharing information. Dr. Robert Malone, inventor of mRNA technology, inventive, brilliant, right? Believes in freedom of speech, liberty, is trying to get information out there to people, true science. Dr. Peter McCullough, same thing. So these are just some examples of some people who have that impulse. And again, I'm not saying, Dr. Robert Malone, I don't know what his religious beliefs are. I feel like maybe he's an atheist, but I don't actually know. He could consider himself a Christian, but he is helping advance this downfall of the Molochians. That's probably the best way to describe it. And so he's allied with that energy, even if he's not, sort of actively aware of that. And indeed, I am allied with the agenda of throwing Moloch back into the pit because I want to see the Epstein style of harm of children gone forever. And that's something that is going to happen, thankfully, in the years to come. But, it's something that I really want to see happen ASAP. So those are some examples of some figures in the Molochian Luciferian factions. And I mean, the classic Luciferian person really is Cosimo Medici in the releasing of the Hermeticon, in many ways being like the primary patron of the Renaissance. And the other Florentine and other families that really push this idea. Sometimes the Ghibellines of the Guelphs and Ghibellines, which we talk about in the Venetian Black Nobility episode 3, they're kind of the Ghibellines seem Luciferian, the ones that were allied with the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Guelphs seem more like they're Molochian. And then once the Guelphs defeated the Ghibellines, then there was a split between the white and black Guelphs, which again kind of had that Molochian. Even within that faction, there was a more Molochian and a more Luciferian set. So those are some examples of the impulse. And then I'm just going to real quick describe what I call the Achilles heel of the Molochian factions. And that's going to set up future episodes where I'm going to go a lot deeper about these 4 points. So the same exact mechanisms that allow for the Molochians to have such tremendous power at this point in time are also somewhat counterintuitively their Achilles heels. And so one example of that is the Epstein blackmail stuff, right? Very much a hallmark and calling card of the Molochians. But you will notice that the Epstein thing came out, and then they tried to shove that under the rug, but couldn't really. And honestly, if it hadn't been for 2020 and the pandemic, very likely people would have demanded action on that. In fact, it is even possible that either Epstein stuff broke to the surface, the Molochians allowed it to come to the surface, knowing that it would get wiped off the news pages by the events of 2020, or even it's possible that the Molochians, fearing that that was going to really go, ape, may have accelerated. I tend to think it's the former rather than the latter. That makes more sense to me, that they allowed that to come out a little bit more. But you'll notice no matter how hard the mainstream media tries, it keeps boop, 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 keeps popping up again, right? Just keeps popping up with really detailed information. Some examples are the Wayfair scandal, right? Look into that. Pizza, right? And then also gate, right? If you put those two words together, I'm trying to trigger the algorithms. Look at the work of Whitney Webb. She's showing how the intelligence agencies have very much used that Epstein-style blackmail to control politicians and political figures and powerful business leaders. And of course, the big one that just broke very recently. And again, someone knew about it who had detailed information and put it out there. And that's how people got it. And they were ready, right? This wasn't just random internet sleuths. People knew what they were doing, who probably were in some intelligence capacity, released the Balenciaga information that came out recently. So it keeps boop, 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 boop. It's like a whack-a-mole, keeps popping up. And no matter how hard the Molochians try, it just keeps popping up. And it keeps popping up in the Hunter Biden laptop, right? It keeps popping up in a way that's nobody's being held accountable, right? You'll notice that the Molochians seem to be sweeping under the rug, and that's what they're really concerned about. They don't want any accountability. They don't want any discussion. They don't want any discovery, right? Like they sealed all the Ghislaine Maxwell records. But what's happening against their will is the groundwork is being laid in the public consciousness more and more and more and more in an indisputable way that this is occurring. And almost all of humanity agrees that that stuff is pure evil and horrible, and they want to put a stop to it. So we'll dive more deeply into that later. So then the second Achilles heel of the Molochian faction is their Babylonian money magic. Their talisman currently of the US petrodollar it's getting shaky. In fact, the entire financial system is extremely shaky. Look at derivatives, they're in the quadrillions, yes, with a Q, quadrillions. And those could go off based on interest rates. But the whole debt-based fiat monetary system is on the verge of collapse in a way that's never been seen before at a global level. And so the Molochians are trying to retrench, right, with that Great Reset thing, and they're also trying to retrench with the central bank digital currencies. And it's very possible the Molochians got duped wanting this thing, the CDBC, into allowing Bitcoin, which was like an NSA thing, and doubtless from the Luciferian faction, they allowed Bitcoin to come out, and then Bitcoin has sort of become a competitor to the banking system, and then crypto, rose up. And so then the Molochians tried to, once again, they tried to take advantage of these new systems and continue to have control. And you see the whole Sam Bankman-Fried FTX scandal, right? And how that links into, Democratic, the DNC, and it links into Ukraine, which is a huge trafficking hub, right? Again, Molochian, right? And that's being exposed. That's coming out. More and more information is coming out about that. And the Luciferians are working on a crypto answer to the Molochian fiat currency system. And I'll go more into that in a future video that should be coming out fairly soon. The third level is telecommunications and the media, right? Telecommunications and the media. And people don't realize it, but almost all telecommunications in the media nowadays goes up into the satellites up in space. Almost all of it goes up into space. And so space is also the ultimate high ground, militarily speaking. And so there's lots of stuff going on in space, and that ultra tech, as I call it, that the Molochian faction has, the ultra tech, right? Anti-gravity, free energy, right? The UFOs that people see that are driven by humans, in my opinion, which is probably 95 to 99% of all verifiable UFOs that we see are actually humans driving this ultra tech, and a much smaller percentage is, interdimensional or extraterrestrial beings, etc. Other explanations. And so we see how that media and narrative control is starting to crumble. And a big part of how it's crumbling is social media and the internet, which goes, again, up through those satellites. And so you can see some contours of some interesting things going on in space, which I'm going to go into in a future episode dedicated to that, where you see things like the mysterious X-37B space plane coming down right after the election. And there's going to be some really juicy stuff about that. And then Musk at Twitter and Musk versus Apple. So there's going to be some interesting stuff about that. And then the fourth major Achilles heel, the Molochian faction, is the medical emergency, the global medical emergency. And you'll notice two things are simultaneously happening, which is very strange. More and more information is coming out every day about how there was an intentional depopulation, sterilization, crippling effort via the you-know-what, right? More and more information coming out every day. It's becoming almost indisputable to any objective, reason-based person if they're allowed to be exposed to the information and they're not in the reactionary part of their brain, cognitive dissonance, so forth. If they're able to be reason-based at all, almost incontrovertible evidence has come out now that there was a pretty clear, intentional, global attempt at a coup d'etat with depopulation. So the Molochian faction is very much behind that, and the Luciferian faction is laying the groundwork more and more and more to show people, look what they tried to do. They tried to take over and they tried to kill you. And that's will be brought forward later when there are trials and when the Molochian faction is brought down, and it will be used as part of the justification of why the Luciferian faction should be the new benefactors and organizers of mankind. And indeed, all four of those Achilles heels are being currently attacked by the Luciferians. The groundwork is being laid to blow up that Molochian power structure and replace it with a Luciferian one. And so that's going to do it for this first episode, and I'm going to hit those different Achilles heels and certain current events that are happening or have been happening in the past few months that really point to this. And I've teased them a little bit in here, and just to do a little bit more of a teaser, we're going to talk about the Epstein stuff, right? We're going to talk about the work of the genius Whitney Webb and all of her stuff, Balenciaga, some of the stuff that's come out around that. We may touch on Wayfair, I'm not sure. I'm not super well versed in that, so I might just stay away from that one and just stick with the ones I know well. But we're going to talk about that blackmail thing. I probably won't do that one first because that one doesn't interest me as much as some of the other ones. It's very important, but it's not, even though I'm super passionate about ending Epstein-style harm of children, that particular subject matter is very dark, and it's not nearly as fascinating to me as some of the other stuff. What's going on with fiat currencies and the crypto sphere and some of the stuff that's breaking there that is massive and world-changing and very positive, that's much more exciting to me. What's going on in space and the telecommunications aspect and like the X-37B space plane and what may have happened there. And of course, I'm going to talk to some degree about the global medical emergency. I have to be real careful on that one because the algos hate that. And I'm starting to have enough subscribers and viewers, thank you so much, that I might even be attracting unfriendly human eyes to this sort of thing. And so I have to be careful when I touch that one. But it's going to be really interesting. And so Shadow Wars, the Luciferians versus the Molochians. This is the end of the inaugural episode, episode 1. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned. I'm going to hit on those Achilles heels and a lot more videos to come showing where it's starting to emerge from the shadows, although it still is very much in the shadows, this shadow war between the Molochians and Luciferians. Stay tuned. And if you haven't already, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much, and you have an awesome day.